I don't want to just sit here and keep doing what we're doing because it's always been the case. Let's keep asking questions. Let's figure out why we can't be better, why we can't do something different. Even if that means I'm vulnerable and I have to admit I don't know what I'm doing yet, or somebody has to train me. But if that's better for my students, then I'm all for it.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators, part of the Ripple Maker Project. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Michelle. It's so nice to see you today.
Welcome back from your travels.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's fun to be here together because I've missed you, and we also get to introduce listeners to Rob Kowalski.
Yes, and fun fact, Rob actually taught your daughter, I loved getting to hear about that.
It was very interesting to me to hear his thinking about a bunch of stuff because I had such a stark and positive experience with him as a parent. Watching what he lit up in Sophia in a really critical time. And so I almost felt like a scientist listening to his answers. I was like, what is this? Like, what is the sauce that makes him show up the way he does with students? So it'd be interesting to see what other people hear in his comments.
I love it. I love it. Should I do a quick intro and then we'll dive in?
Please.
Okay, great. So Rob Kowalski is currently teaching 8th grade humanities in Parish Middle School in Dallas, Texas. He's been, over the course of his career, a teacher, a coach, a stay-at-home dad, an administrator, and then chose to go back into education as an 8th grade teacher. And it sounds like that's where he's found his happy place. And he is laser focused on relationships and staying connected with the kids for lots of reasons. So let's hear about those reasons from him.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hello, Rob.
Hi, Michelle.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
I'm ecstatic to have you here, and I want to give a little bit of context before we get into some questions. You were my youngest daughter, Sophia's 8th grade humanities teacher. It was her first year at that school at Parish, and it was COVID. And you made such an impression on her and on Patrick and I because it was in your class where she felt seen. And she felt like engaged as a human and as a learner. And we've had, between both of our daughters, so many teachers, almost all of them extraordinary in their own way. But you're the only person I've ever actually filled out hey, do you want to recommend someone for an award? You're it for me. You're the only one that inspired me that much because you really helped her find her place at Parish and helped her ground during COVID in a new school. So personally, thank you. And today we get to know you and pick your brain about how you became that kind of teacher.
Well, thank you. What's even more interesting than that for me was that was my first year at Parish too. So it was, Parish was my new school. Though I had some affiliation with Parish as a parent years prior when my older son was here, but new experience coming from 2 previous independent schools to Parish to, hey, we're going to be on campus 1 week, off campus another, have an advisory, get to know some 8th graders, sort of, because, well, actually, I don't think we even got on campus for maybe the first month or so.
Yeah.
And everything was brand new, right? Google Meet and trying to introduce yourself to these kids and, like you said, make an impression on them when all you see is like their forehead, right? Or maybe their camera's not even on and your new boss is popping in on the Google Meet to see, is this guy even teaching? My wife is like, my God, you've talked about Civil War for like 6 weeks. Can you move on? And I was in
bored.
my bed. Yeah, I was in the bedroom because she was in the study, and our boys were somewhere in the house doing their thing. And but I do remember Sophia vividly, and she did such a great job. And I'd say kudos to her because she was engaged. Like, she had the discipline. At times at your counter, because I could see you and your husband walking by from time to time. But she always showed up, like, which wasn't easy for all the kids.
Yeah.
But she also participated when we had or tried to have discussions on a Google Meet, or I'd put in questions like in the chat. But so she definitely showed the dedication and perseverance and tenacity that we talk about at Parish, and was really modeling it for us, as an 8th grader. And it's, it's amazing to see that she's already moving on from here and heading on to bigger things. So, I hope we never experience something like that again. I don't think we will. I don't think schools will do that unless it's like the bubonic plague. But, it was an experience and memorable for all of us, especially those kids. And I know we all learned a great deal from it, right? As educators, as parents, especially, you and I both having gone through it, what not to do, what we would do. And so many people had to help us, right, from the technology front. Like, it's even cool that we're able to do this today and see one another and have a podcast, but just trying to facilitate school. One good thing is we didn't have AI back then. Otherwise, no kids would have done any work because we couldn't see it. So, but no, it was, I'm glad our paths have crossed because of my teaching Sophia. So I'm looking forward to today.
Same here. Tell us your story, and I'm really curious your perspective on how you became the kind of educator that can create the container for kids to feel seen and see themselves as learners.
Sure.
And I'll interrupt just to put one more point in. I think there are a lot of people out there that feel like it's either or. You either engage kids as learners, you're that kind of teacher, or you really connect with kids as humans and develop them socially and emotionally. Of course, that's a false dichotomy, and you embody that to me. So tell us your story and
Sure.
any insight you
Sure.
have onto why you are that way.
Sure. So I grew up in New Jersey, raised Catholic, youngest of 4 boys. We all went to Our Lady of Sorrows school, and I was taught mostly by nuns, which, you don't hear about much anymore. And that experience couldn't have been any different than what I had in high school. To answer your question simplistically, the reason I became a teacher, and I think I'm the teacher I am today, so many years later, I attribute to going to the Petty School in Hightstown, New Jersey. Petty, back in the day when that's where I met my wife. It's another reason Petty is, has a special place in my heart. But Petty was described by many periodicals as like the little engine that could. Not a well-known school then, didn't have a huge endowment, but it was in Hightstown, New Jersey. My dad worked in Hightstown for McGraw-Hill. My 2 oldest brothers, 7 and 8 years older than I am, didn't go to Petty. They went to Notre Dame High School, which I would say was like put Jesuit and Ursuline together. That would be Notre Dame High School in Lawrence, New Jersey.
Okay.
3rd brother, because of a family friend, he ended up going to Petty. It's a boarding school, maybe 10% day students. So I then came along, and my dad and mom were like, well, where do you want to go to high school? I'm like, at first I was going to be the rebel and be the lone son to go to public school. No way I would have done that. Knew a bunch of people going to Notre Dame. They were very successful in soccer. I was a soccer player. But there was just something about being at Petty. It's, it's like a college campus. School Monday through Saturday, half day Wednesday, half day Saturday. Teachers teach 5 out of 6 days. The teachers live in the dorms, coach the teams, advise you. They do it all. I said, I knew it would be a financial sacrifice, but I remember vividly at a baseball game on a Saturday watching my brother play. I said, Dad, I want to go here. Like, can I go here? Because I knew financially it would be a lot. And he's like, well, then we'll make it happen. So Petty, John Stahl, my history teacher, thinking about him, thinking about Bill Hill, my English teacher, Andy O'Hara, just names I'll never forget, because not only did they teach us, but the manner in which I learned, Harkness style, sitting at small tables, 10, 12 students, the first 5-7 minutes of class, how are you? What's going on in the world? Like, it's a BS session, right? And then let's get our books out and let's dive into the literature. I was an English major in college, so I always knew I wanted to go be a teacher because of that experience. They also coached us. I wanted to be a coach. I thought maybe I'd go to a boarding school after college, but that never really was in the cards. But I knew I always wanted to teach. So I went to Stonehill College wanting to major in English and be an English teacher. I also had a scholarship job at Petty. I worked in the English office my first 3 years of school. So because I was on scholarship, I had to, go work in whatever they assigned me. And they assigned me to the English office of all places. So back then I'm running photocopies, the mimeograph machine, getting ink on my fingers, stapling, collating, doing all that.
Back in the early 1900s.
Yes. Yeah, this would have been, 1987. I graduated in 91. But it also made me get a bird's eye view, right, or hands-on experience of like, this is what they're doing. They come into the office, they're grading papers. I could just see myself like doing that for, a career, knowing full well, I'm not doing it for money. But so I went off to Stonehill, majored in English, minored in secondary education. I did my student teaching in small town, West Bridgewater near Stonehill. I taught, I think, a 5th grade class for student teaching. I did that to get to get pre-certified in the state of Massachusetts. I had a 5-year grace period. I always wanted to go back to a private school or like a boarding school or somewhere. But my first year out of college, I didn't teach at all because back then, no internet, right? I'm not able to really search for jobs unless I get the Boston Globe because I wanted to stay in the Boston area. So I ended up moving back to Boston with my 2 buddies from college, no job. And I worked for a year at Putnam Investments, doing mutual funds, answering phones. But it got me to pay my rent.
Yeah.
And then that next year, I was able to get a teaching job in a town west of Boston called Ashland, where I taught for 2 years as an 8th grade English teacher, coached soccer and baseball. And at that time, my wife and I had gotten back together. She was finishing law school at Harvard. I wanted to live in Boston. She said no, too cold. I had visited Dallas a couple of times, and we decided let's go to Dallas. She had an offer in San Francisco at a firm, but no family out there, and came here. And once we decided that, I started looking for jobs, and it just so happened that my brother-in-law to be, her youngest sibling, was going to be an 8th grader at Cistercian. So I wrote to Cistercian, Rob Kowalski, interested in, whatever. So the headmaster at the time, Father Peter Verhalen, who's now Abbot Peter, calls my mother-in-law and says, "Do you know Rob Kowalski? Is he a good guy?" Because I referenced her in my letter. And she said, "I hope so. He's marrying my daughter." Like, yes, I hope he's a good guy.
If not, we have bigger problems.
Right. So I actually flew down on my spring break to find an apartment. So I found a little 2-bedroom on Normandy and Lomo Alto in University Park. And then I interviewed at Cistercian. I got back to Boston and Father Peter called me and offered me the job. So I taught my brother-in-law my first year.
Wow.
So I went to Cistercian, was coaching middle school football, varsity soccer, and middle school baseball. And I taught nothing but grammar, 2 classes of grammar to, 2 grade levels in the middle school. And I did that my first 9 years in Dallas and absolutely loved it. We had our first son, and then once the second son was coming along, Michelle got pregnant again. We decided I would stay home. That, she's a lawyer, right? Obviously economics involved. So I stepped away from teaching and was just dad for 5 years.
Wow.
At that time, Aiden, my oldest, was a student at Parish. He went to Parish kindergarten through 5th grade and then went to Cistercian. So I knew Monaco. I knew, a number of people here at Parish, and he had a great experience at Parish. We love Parish for him. It just that Cistercian was a better fit academically for him. It was, it's rigorous, but it's also very fast paced, and that was good for him. And so as Dylan got older, he was going into kindergarten. He was 4 or 5. I was looking at getting back into the classroom. Cistercian didn't have any openings. So I took a long-term sub position at St. John's Episcopal School in East Dallas, where Mark Crotty was my head of school. So I started there just thinking.
And Mark Crotty, if anyone listens on the regular, you'll remember Mark Crotty from another episode, which I had not connected those dots when I reached out to you, but I love that.
Yeah, Mark and I are still in touch. He's just finishing his post now at the Northwest Association of Independent Schools, and I believe he's going to be a consultant. But immediately Mark and I clicked, one, because he's a soccer aficionado, and we had that in common with his son at Green Hill. So it turns out they needed me to stay, and I gladly did. So I stayed at St. John's for 8 years, where first 5, I was teaching English in the 8th grade. I also served as a high school coordinator, helping the 8th graders who graduate look for other high schools. So I started doing some admission work, ended up my last couple of years doing I was an admin. New head of school came in, and, with that comes change. And so I needed to find something new myself, and COVID hit spring of 2020. Great time to look for a job. Saw that Parish was hiring for middle school humanities. And even though I was an admin my last few years at St. John's, I always had an advisory. I always had a touch point with students. So going back to the classroom was really a blessing for me. So I applied, talked to Dr. Wilson. They offered me the job, and it was, I was no longer nervous about finding a job because it happened kind of quickly that spring, but just to go to a place I already knew. Dave Monaco took over when Aiden was a student here. Perfect fit for me to be an 8th grade humanities teacher. I was a little nervous at first, being like an English degree, an English teacher, but it's U.S. history. And then you throw COVID in, throw in the technology, and that's how I landed here 5 years ago. And now it seems like I've been here, longer than that. And it's just kind of cool that this graduating class means I now know most of the kids in the high school. Granted, we get new students in 9th grade often, but I've now, as we matriculate, I know each group of kids as they go through high school and come back in my classroom. I see them in the hallways. Sometimes it's not cool to talk to your 8th grade teacher anymore, but when I have lunch duty, Sophia and her friends sit at the same table like every day. So I always go say hi to them and kind of just check on them and see how they're doing. But honestly, Michelle, there's nothing else. I've never looked back and thought, wow, I wish I could have been doing real estate or been a doctor. I mean, I've never woken up and said, this isn't bringing me joy anymore. That's never happened, because every day's different. There's nothing the same. Even difficult situations, challenging students, it's all, what motivates me to get up and come work here. And it's not, and honestly, I will say the last part, my long-winded answer, is it's never been about the content for me. I mean, I think I could teach Spanish if I had to, or any subject, because it's about, as you said, connecting with students, because I had people who cared about me and connected with me, even when I struggled in academics, certain classes in high school, being an honor student, but marrying the valedictorian, marrying a Stanford, Brown, and Harvard grad, all 3 schools of which I went to none. But at the same time, I know myself, and that, this is my vocation, this is my calling, to impact the lives of my students, so that hopefully, when Sophia left my space and went to 9th grade, she felt good about herself. First and foremost, that's my goal, right? That they leave 8th grade from me, whether it's here at Parish or another school, that I've given them the shot in the arm that they need to know you're going to be okay. You can do the work, whatever that is, but you should be feeling proud of who you are and what you want to do going forward. They're going to have 4, 8, maybe 12 more years of schooling with, all the academics that they need. I'm not too stressed about, whether or not they've written the perfect essay in 8th grade. My goal is to help them improve those skills, and we do. But at the same time, as you know, parenting children through middle school, there is so much more going on, both developmentally, emotionally, socially, especially socially middle school, that throw in a pandemic, that the perspective, at least in my opinion, has to be, we hear whole child in education all the time, but I think that means so much more, not to mention the research, right? The research that we've gotten more and more over the last number of years seems to be telling us, begging us to do more, right? And especially with mental health that we saw in the pandemic, that some kids are still trying to figure out, what happened and who am I and what is that going to be? So that's my reason. That's my why. It's not because I'm, looking forward to the next breakthrough in technology to help me diagram sentences with my kids, right? Or, it's cool though that AI now can can give them more information. But what I've enjoyed doing more and more is, I always try to relate what we do in class to their world. What does that look like? Right? Even if we're talking about the Constitution and talking about the current state of affairs, we don't get into the politics of it, but we just look at fact. There is a Constitution, right? Things have changed. There are executive orders, regardless of who's president. What's happening in the news? Because, as you know, if it's not on TikTok, if it's not in front of them, then they're not really aware. So I strive to do that for them and try to make sure. One thing parenting has helped me do is try to stay in the know so that I can be in that space with them. Because I also think that matters at every level you teach a student, especially as they get older, right? That I understand that they're impacted by brain rot and what's on TikTok. And can we do an assignment that, oh my God, you know what that is, Mr. Kowalski? I'm like, yeah. I try to, not because I want to be the cool guy, but if I can't relate to them, right? How are they going to be interested?
Yeah.
My philosophy is like, win today so they want to come back tomorrow. So they get in the car and relay something positive about their day, whether they laughed in my class, learned something, debated something. I want them to want to come back tomorrow, not dread it. Because I know that feeling I had sometimes as a student of, oh God, geometry class again.
That's a great North Star, though. Like, we behave a certain way when we want someone to continue re-engaging with us.
Right.
And I don't know if everyone is thinking that way, regardless of your position in a school. I don't know if everyone's thinking about that, but that would be behavior shaping.
Yeah. And I would argue that, not everybody thinks that way. And I'm not saying my way is the only way, of course. It's just, I think we, as educators, as a system, always should be reminding ourselves of our why.
Yeah.
And not just say it in a, 250 person meeting in August because we're starting the year or we're finishing the year. But also, perspective of, again, what are we asking the kids to do? Why are we asking them to do it? Why does it look the same from 100 years ago? And can't we really be doing something better? Right. And then if you take that and spin that a certain way, I guess, where we are, right, geographically in the Dallas, in a very, very strong private school market where there are options, but, who's doing what? And it's our own space race, I guess, if you will, competing for the dollar. I mean, let's not forget that too, that, parents want a return on investment. So, I've always been the type, and you can probably understand this from me already, that, I don't want to just sit here and keep doing what we're doing because it's always been the case. Let's keep asking questions. Let's figure out why we can't be better, why we can't do something different. Even if that means I'm vulnerable and I have to admit I don't know what I'm doing yet, or somebody has to train me. But if that's better for my students, then I'm all for it.
I mean, what you're describing, if you're always living at that sort of edge of what could we be doing better, differently, you got to get comfortable with some vulnerability and a sense of always being a tiny bit wobbly. The alternative is to be completely secure in irrelevancy.
Right. Right.
Which do you want?
Right. And I see it in my students' eyes when they give you the look of, really? Why do I need to do this? I have no interest in diagramming a sentence. I have no interest in knowing why, Woodrow Wilson did what he did. And I think that's valid because, one thing I realized on our 8th grade trip this year is we've made modifications annually. But when you go to DC, you're going to museums, you're going to see the sites. Well, the further we get away from some of those events, how much can a 14-year-old really look at the Vietnam Memorial and understand it in its full gravity? They can't. Even if we've studied it in class, they see a wall, they see the names. You want them to be respectful, but they don't really appreciate it. And I don't think it's their fault, right? Just as my generation ages, these next generations, if all they know is it's from a history book, not the same experience for my parents who might go to DC or different generations that are older than I am, and what those wars, what these monuments mean, right? Now, they certainly will always have significance.
Yeah.
And they should, and we should remember them, especially with, what goes on in politics these days. But it just makes me wonder, as I'm sitting there on my trip talking to a colleague, And then I use ChatGPT. If we were doing a 3-day trip to Washington, D.C., what should we highlight? I mean, so it's just those iterations, like design thinking. Several people I follow, on social media or on LinkedIn, that's what fuels me now, I think, as I've done this for a long time. On my third independent school, 20 some odd years as a teacher, of just kind of, where should we go? How should we lead these kids? And getting back to vulnerability, if I can model that for my kids, then hopefully they can be a little bit vulnerable in class, which is a big ask for certain middle schoolers.
Absolutely.
Because they are so perceptive of, oh my God, I have a question, but as soon as I ask it, I'm going to be judged by my peers, even though the teacher says, don't judge. They do. Mm-hmm. They may not do it in front of me, but as soon as they go in the hall or in the bathroom or in the locker room, I know that happens. That's always happened. I did it as a teenager. Not proud of it, but that happens. So it's that awareness that I approach each day and try to engage with them, right? So
it's like you're plugged into the stakes, both the stakes of them being engaged and learning and being challenged in a relevant way, and then also the stakes of what it means for them to open their mouths, to step into discussion, to do all the things that we're asking of them. You have a different sensor about the stakes than a lot of people I talk to.
Well, honestly, I think I owe it to them. I think that's why I'm here. I think that's why you pay tuition dollars like you've paid, is that, it would be incredibly easy in my 20 whatever year with AI for me to mail it in, right? The podcast I mentioned to you earlier yesterday, I was listening to, talked about basically the concept of coasting. So you've got kids that coast because it's too easy. You also have kids that don't want to engage and they coast for that reason. And you also have kids who struggle and just put their hands up and coast. But then the adults coast too. AI could write everything for me. And I can just copy and paste onto a Google Doc, share it with my students, talk a little bit and be done, go home every day at 4:00, collect a paycheck. And, I'm sure that happens in many schools, right? Whether it's private or public, and, like silent quitting, or whatever, that was the big, phrase the last few years. But I mean, that's not why I'm here. But at the same time, I'm always been interested in the tools that are available to me to help my students. Plus, what are the tools they're using on a daily basis, right? We're not taking away phones. They're not going anywhere. Computers aren't going in. None of that's, we're stuck with it. Social media is not going everywhere. Heck, we can't even decide if TikTok's getting banned or bought or whatever. But so rather than just ignore it, pretend that's the evil in the world, how do I connect with them, model for them safely with AI and things like that, in order to show them this can be relevant, this can work for you. And, we at Parish want to prepare them for whatever's next. For me, high school. Well, then again, I feel obligated to try to at least bring it to their attention so that they're not, I guess, lagging, right? Falling behind where others could be, The other thing is they adapt so quickly. I think we forget that sometimes, more so than adults.
Yeah.
And that's another fear I think that has to be addressed. But so it's always trying to figure out, what's my hook? How can I get in and, make sure that there's some sort of connection there. And that varies with each student, the depth of which or how personable they are with me. But I just want them to know that this is a safe space. I want them to hopefully have some fun. And if I can help them learn and polish their writing, next year will be a little different for me. We're splitting humanities into English and or English and history.
Okay.
So I'm going to teach just history next year.
Okay.
And same curriculum, U.S. history, and we're changing from 85-minute blocks to 50-minute periods, which I think is more appropriate for middle schoolers, right? 10-year-olds trying to do 85 minutes in fifth grade is just a challenge. Even now with eighth grade, I feel like if I get a good hour out of them, then I've won, right?
Because by the time,
by the time they come back from recess, get settled, we start a lesson, do some discussion or some work or write, right? Their brains can't handle more than, That's
just being like
science.
sensitive to where
Yes.
they're at and what they can
Right.
absorb, and how do we create the conditions where they can thrive.
Right. Like again, that's where the model has done them a disservice, in my opinion. Right. We're not sending them out to the farm this summer to go help mom and dad. Therefore, we can't have school. Or let's, what role does school play in daycare? People have to go work. So I need to get my kids somewhere so then I can go do my job to pay the $40,000 tuition, and I'll come get you when I'm done. And thankfully you have aftercare, because my boss won't let me leave in America to go pick up my children. Even though they say we want families' values, time is money. So, I mean, there's a lot that has to be changed.
This kind of pings on that concept. I have two questions for you. The first is, if we had no tyranny of it's always been done this way,
Right.
or tyranny of incremental change, if those things weren't a thing, and you could design the optimal way for kids to learn in 2025, short form, what would your school look like? And then I've got a follow-up question.
Okay. I think it certainly wouldn't be 8 hours long.
Yeah.
We're not in a factory. They're not punching the time clock and expecting them to churn something out on a daily basis. I think my approach would be one of, to step back for a second, I think we lose over time, or have lost, the wonder, the curiosity, the encouragement of that look in a child's eyes to say, one, what about this? Or I'm curious about that. And part of that goes back to what I said earlier, because is that cool to say that? Am I going to be judged for that? So I guess I would want to focus more on skills that are based on real world application, right? So of course we need math, but looking at like the canon when it comes to English and reading and writing, academics aren't going to like that I say this, but like the manner in which the kids communicate, LOL, when I'm texting, versus polishing an essay just because I say so, it's hard to get buy-in, or because the grade matters more. That's the other thing is, finding a balance of letting them be curious, providing enough content to work on and build those skills so that they want to come tomorrow, like I said before, and learn more about what they're curious about. So as they mature, how do they tackle problems to solve for themselves, for the world? Where do they want to study, right? And then and just look at the model as it goes, 4 more years. Like in other parts of the world, my wife's an attorney. Why do I have to go get an undergraduate degree and pay that money before I can even entertain law school? Why can't I go just study law? I don't know. I mean, it's
money.
Yeah, exactly. And the system is such that it's all revolves around money. So I think a shorter academic day with breaks, but utilizing what's inherent to kids. They're curious. They have feelings. They want to play. They want to congregate and socialize with each other. So in those environments, small pods, and then I think the hardest conversation that we've gotten away from historically is the notion of blended classrooms. Students, my classrooms are small, relatively speaking, for schools. I have one that's 14 students and one that's 18 students, and they are a diverse group of learners. There is merit to that, but there's also merit in sometimes, certain students have to raise the game and achieve. Others can't go so fast or don't want to go so fast. So how can we, I don't have the answer for that. We used to call it tracking, but we don't want to hurt their self-esteem, which I appreciate. But there's got to be a way to level learning. Technology can help. I know there are schools now that do a lot of AI-based work for 2 hours, but then they also do a couple of hours of life skills. They're teaching kids to cook, change tires, have recess. So that sort of thing, I think, is where I would gravitate to. So that school is really something they're excited about, that it's not just daycare, and the kids can then determine like what's the next path with their parents, of course, of what do I want to pursue? Is it something in the arts? Is it something in science? And why, like we in America have like, how do we view apprenticeships? That's not even a thing, or internships, right?
Right.
Rather than just go shadow somebody. But what's wrong with, okay, I really want to get into the sciences. Why can't I do that sooner? So,
That's
yes,
so interesting.
the curriculum would have to change. I don't know how you grade that, but grades are inflated nowadays anyway. So I think it's, but I also feel like we've had this conversation for 20 years and nothing's changed.
Right.
We can change a schedule. We can change a few electives. We can change some things, but it's got to be a bold decision. And, I don't know if public school would ever get there because of the dollars involved. And, if there's money involved, where's the data? Where's the proof that the money being spent turns out a certain product? Well, that's different for everybody.
Right.
What Sophia wanted out of school and where she wants to go to college is different than the other student right next to her, or her sister or brother, or, whoever the child is. There's no one size fits all. And that's the hard part, right? Is that we've tried to, and for obvious reasons, we can't go one-to-one with every student.
Yeah.
Montessori is small, but I mean, it's a great question that I think, philosophers over the years have had discussions about, that we'll continue to discuss. But I would like to see something like that, because I think that would bring value in a variety of ways, mostly for the students. Like, everything has to be student driven in my mind. Like, what's best for kids?
What's best for kids? My favorite part of your answer is that getting kids reconnected to their own curiosity and having like spaciousness around how they lean into that. Like, that sort of is sucked out of the education system present day. It's really hard for them to do that.
And adults, frankly, can't do it either, because you've got to make a career to make money to pay for your house and take care of your kids at these schools. And so you have to sacrifice the ability, until you reach a point maybe where you have enough resources, or you find the job that allows you to do that. And for me, it kind of does, in that I can explore some of my own passions, like intellectually, because I'm a teacher. I have the summer, I have, weekends. I'm not, on the clock 24/7. But I know that's the grind of like parenthood and adulthood. Yeah. But if we can provide an environment where everybody's doing that, then I think some of the social anxieties go away, and that it's okay to say, okay, you're my friend in the 8th grade. Michelle plays the violin. That's cool. I'm going to go play soccer. Okay. And then I'm curious about coding, or I'm curious about the violin. Like, to me, versus force feeding, because historically we've always said, you must do these things. We must track you, take a standardized test, and to make some sort of determination. Well, how many success stories have we heard where students didn't do well early on, found something else in themselves, the light switch went on, something clicked, and here they are, successful.
Yeah.
By their own measure, not because they make a certain amount of money or have a certain job title, but they feel satisfied.
Yes.
And proud of what they've accomplished. And to me, that's the goal. Like, I mean, that's the parish way that we recite in chapel every day, versus what's your GPA? Is it going to get me a foot in the door somewhere else? And, again, that's the greatest challenge, is who's, I think, brave enough to do something like that.
Create those. Yeah.
And who wants to get on board?
Because present day, it feels like the more frequent story sometimes is, I found this path despite my formal education. It wasn't facilitated by my formal education.
Yeah, it wasn't Mark Twain who said, "I've never let my schooling interfere with my education," or something along those lines. I mean,
yeah.
And I think all of us, at least our age, have stories to tell. Like, yes, the nuns taught me discipline and I learned my times tables, but I also didn't love going to school. I didn't, I shouldn't have to go to school in fear.
Yeah.
They didn't hit us or anything, but it was just that
rigid
intimidation. And I don't ever want students to fear coming to my class, or if they make a bad grade on something, like, that's not the end of the world, even though, that may be, I don't know what home life is like necessarily, that, what standards they have to maintain. But, there's the other thing is, there's so many constituents, right? There's not just the school deciding. You need the parents on board, you need the students on board. and it's just, change is so hard to make. It feels like sometimes it's an iceberg.
Yeah, completely.
And it's trendy too. There are so many trends in education, right?
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackieBox. TackieBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackieBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackiebox.com to learn more and become a TackieBox district.
You kind of naturally segued into my next question, which is, given the current conditions, that was kind of the dream question, but like, given our current conditions, if there's someone listening that wants like 1, 3, 5 things that they can do, even if it's just a 2% tweak that you can stand behind, that you're like, if you want to do something that can shift the experience in the classroom, here are 3, 5, however many things, what would be on your list?
I think I definitely would recommend how we approach grading as such a definitive label, whether that's school and or parents. Like I tell my students and my own children, all you can do is your best, right? I love golf. I will never play professional golf. No matter how much I practice, I will never be a professional golfer. I'm okay with that. I can still have fun. Some of us are never going to write the perfect essay. That doesn't mean you're less than. It just means maybe that student has a skill that's inherent to them and they can just have the gift of writing, whereas another student may have the mathematical gift. But it's just, again, it goes back to what are the stressors we're putting on our students and what can we take off their plate? I guess to answer your question, right? What can you take off your child's plate? There's FOMO of everything. I don't want my kid to be left out. I want him to get a trophy. I want him to be on the soccer team. I want him to, is that what's in their best interest, right? It's okay to say no sometimes.
Have you heard that newer phrase? I think it's JOMO. The joy of missing out.
Oh, the joy of, yeah.
That's where I live.
Yes. Yeah, because and so much of that isn't even tied into the students. It's it's the parents.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah,
make all
you're right.
The kids don't make all the decisions, but
yeah.
I think if we could
tremendous pressure on
really
them.
look at what are the stakes, like what are the measurements by which we define success, whether that's an academic grade, whether that's where I'm going to school, where I'm going from, but not to say that you should be shamed either, because it's okay to want to go to a named school if that's what's best for you. I mean, and that's truly, I think, it's about fit. Like when you went through the process of finding a school for Sophia, like what was the best fit for her? She came to Parish in 8th grade because that's when you guys wanted her to find a new place, a new fit, and there was something that attracted you, whether it was the dance program and our academics and all of the above. But that's what I think we have an opportunity to do, is what fit do we want for our kids, especially in Dallas and different schools, and then college. Like where do you see yourself? And we couldn't visit schools with our older son during COVID because there were no formal visits, right? You had to do it on your own with a mask on.
Yeah.
But as we've gone to different schools with our younger son now and really experienced, to see schools, presentations, dorms, et cetera, he really can determine, oh, wow, yeah, I could see myself here.
Him up.
Right. And why can't the educational experience itself, there are certain schools he's visited where he would get to set his own path, right? Like Dartmouth comes to mind. And, why force a kid to take calculus if they don't want to? But if you want to take it, great, we offer it. I mean, so little things, I think, of just the more we can take off their plate so they don't feel judged or stressed, to bring back the curiosity, to let them have a balanced life that they're not just grinding with
Yeah.
homework, but also to go to dance practice, a soccer game, and voice lessons all in the same week so that they're exhausted. Like there has to be balance. Like overall, what is the balance of life that we all want as individuals? Like my wife and I talk about, like, we get one shot at this,
Yeah.
right? And we're doing the best we can, but couldn't we do better for the sake of the children? And people say that they want that all the time, but nothing changes. And, we just keep running the rat race and drop our kids off, pick them up, and, continue on because of all those other factors. So I would love to see us maybe value or cherish their childhood or their experience even more than we do now, because they do have time. It doesn't have to be in such a hurry, so that class can be, wonder and joy, and, not some cranky old teacher saying to get off my lawn because they didn't learn that way. And, and I fear that still exists, in many places. So it would take some real bravery, I think, and real hard work to determine what would that even look like. But I'd sign up for it.
Same here. And as I listen to you talk, I think there's an ethos in how you approach things that every single person listening can apply to their locus of control, whether it's their classroom or their school or their district. And a lot of it has to do with slowing down enough to engage with the person in front of you as an individual.
Right.
Yeah.
Or when you're out with somebody,
Yeah.
and they look right through you, or they look at their phone, and
Yeah.
that the intentionality,
Yeah.
right? And emphasizing, like you just said, listening is a skill, to learn empathy. Like all of the buzzwords we hear in so many aspects of education, yet the issues, the problems I described, a little while ago, of the social, emotional issues our kids feel in the halls, all of those things are still prevalent every single day. And they always will be in this space.
Yeah.
And if we don't do a better job, or here's a great example, and this is not a slight to the individuals, but we value their social, emotional well-being. How many counselors do schools have?
Yeah.
Like one.
Yeah.
Right, for like a couple hundred kids, or the ratio. There's teacher to student ratio, which is great, small. But if you have 3 kids having an issue at once, well, then you're pulling in admin and their quasi counselors. And I'm not unrealistic thinking we're going to have 30 counselors, but it's just, again, where do we value? Where are we helping kids truly, or are we asking adults to do things that they're not trained to do or comfortable doing? Because let's face it, what I do isn't, and this is not me, Rob, it's me, educator, like teachers. We're not just content deliverers,
Of course
right?
not.
No, we're sometimes parenting, sometimes big brothering,
Yeah.
mentoring, or
Yeah.
just listening, disciplining. I mean, we wear so many hats, which is another reason, honestly, I love my job, is because we get to do so many different things for so many different people on an annual basis that, that's the other thing. It's not just, I didn't sign up to be a content deliverer. If I wanted to do that, no, I would have mailed it in a long time ago.
It's so much more robust. And to me as a parent, you're a really good example of meeting a child's needs without, because sometimes you hear, we're not their counselor, we're not their therapist, we're not their parent. And all of those, I get that pushback because it's insane what's asked of educators. But the way you engaged with students, you aren't crossing into the spaces that aren't yours to cross into, but just showing up and seeing them and interacting with them with such respect and care. That is medicine.
Oh yeah, and we need to be the conduit for them. Sometimes with their own parents, sometimes with admin, or a counselor, or just be a safe space, like I said,
Human to human,
that they can just talk or get something off their chest. I mean, we all have those needs as adults. To think the kids don't is naive.
Yeah.
And you see it on their faces every day.
Yeah.
Because you know what's going on in their lives, and T.S. Eliot wrote, I'm paraphrasing here, like we all prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet, right? It's we all put a smile on our face regardless of what's going on in our personal lives as we go off to work every day. And that's the same for the kids,
They do it
whether
too.
it's home life or they're infatuated with somebody in the hallway who doesn't want to give them the time of day. Well, that's a gut punch every time they walk by them in the hallway or in the cafeteria, or they get made fun of because somebody finds out that, you like Susie and she doesn't like you back. You're a loser. Oh, let me go take my science test now.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And middle
Right.
school.
Yes.
Bless a teacher
Absolutely.
like you that gets that in the height of that.
Yeah, I
awkwardness.
chaperoned the dance last Friday night, and aside from like flashbacks, I actually found a picture I showed my colleagues from my high school prom, which was funny. But because here comes the group that's obviously gotten together hours before and did hair, makeup, whatever, and then a few that are coming in alone thinking, oh my God, who am I going to see first? Please let me find a friend. And then they see the security blanket, like, okay, hey, they're here.
Yes.
Or, will that person notice me tonight? Are we going to, so all of that's going on a daily basis that, who wants to read poetry today with Mr. Kowalski when you're trying to
Makes
do all
your
that,
heart
right?
explode
Yeah.
just thinking about the
Right.
intensity of those
Right.
years.
Because
Yeah.
in that space at like 13, 14 years old where I teach, that's real. Like that's your everything. Like you don't want your world to shatter, and it's not always at a convenient time that, hey, mom and dad, my heart's broken, or or let's say sibling goes off to college, or a grandparent passes away, or a pet, like all of those things that you just have to have the perspective of what's really that important. When we talk about late policies and missing assignments and those things, that yes, we want structure. Yes, we're trying to build skills, but I forget things. That's why I have a spouse, I guess, and a family calendar. But
Not just any spouse. You
Right.
leveled yourself up 100 times.
Yes, but
when you married Michelle.
But when we talk about empathy and we talk about grace, right, we need to extend it not only to our students ourselves, but they need to learn to do that for themselves too, because we do also see those kids who are so stressed out by the tiniest of things that if they, get a 99 and they're like, oh my God, or like in our school, like if you get an infraction for chewing gum, let's say, or like, oh my God, I'm going to be in so much trouble. And you're like, there are far worse things you
You're
can
good.
be.
Trust
do.
us,
Yes,
you're good.
exactly. I don't think mom and dad are going to be. In fact, some parents want the kid to chew gum so they have that experience, right? Because they never even put a toe in that water.
Yes.
But that's like all of these things. I'm smiling because it's like that's what I do. Like that's the job.
That's a
Whereas
great job.
It is, and some people view it as like, oh my God, you teach middle schoolers. I know that must be the worst. And it's like no,
Yeah.
because it's hard not to remember what it felt like to be in a middle school.
Right.
Right,
And when you show up as an anchor in that space,
Right.
it's everything,
Yes.
as we experienced with you
Right.
so many years ago.
And and when you think back in your own nostalgic ways of the people who impacted your life as teachers, that's what they remember. They're not going to remember that, that I taught them how to write a better introductory sentence to paragraph 3 in a 4-paragraph essay. Right. I mean,
That's
if they
right.
do, great. But that's not what I want to be remembered for, is that hopefully they remembered I was, a guy that was in their lives for a year and I care about them. And if they need support in any other way thereafter, they can always reach out, email, knock on the door, and I'm happy to help.
It's amazing. Thank you for being who you are and for impacting our lives as a family. And I know we're just a tiny percentage of all the families over this incredible career you've had that you've been a part of our kids finding themselves and as learners, but as probably much more important as people.
Yeah. And I'm also grateful for you for having me today, but also, getting to share these years with different families, different students in different capacities at several different schools. It's helped me in my own journey, both as an educator, but certainly as a parent. I mean, I was a teacher and a coach long before we had our first son, and, watching that evolution as a parent of your own child getting educated, but then educating other kids who were of similar age was really kind of fun. And I should put pen to paper someday and write about it of just what what it's like to observe when you need to step in, when you want to step in and you can't step in, and tough love and all of that stuff. It's kind of been a unique thing the last 22 years, having 22 and 17-year-old sons, to now have been teaching in middle school, honestly, in Dallas, it was 9, over 20 years, I guess, in middle school. And I always fancied when I left Petty, going back to the beginning of our talk today, I thought I was going to be a high school teacher. And I thought, the younger kids would be hard. And I can't imagine going to upper school now and teaching the juniors and seniors or something like that. I really feel like I found my niche and really enjoy this age group, especially. They're still so impressionable. They need so much from us, academics as well, but the nurturing, I've always said the best job I've ever had is being a dad. That's, my sons have always been first for us. But this job allows me to do those things too, because they're very similar, and just trying to be there and guide them as best I can. I'm going to make mistakes. I always have. I always will. With teaching, you learn early on. You put your foot in your mouth a few times, and I made a student cry my first year because I asked her if the flood was coming because she had like capri pants on, and I didn't realize I didn't know what capris were, right? I just thought she had floods on, and then she ended up writing me an apology for crying, and I'm like, I thought I was getting a letter from her parents that was going to rip me, but it was she was apologizing for getting upset, and I was like, I'm the one who made a comment.
Sweet
So
one. That's so precious.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, so many wonderful memories, and I'll certainly never forget Sophia's year because of COVID and what that was like. I remember, I think I still have it. I do. So we came to school that first week, and it was actually a great idea because we had masks on. They gave us buttons.
Oh, yeah.
So the kids could see what I actually looked like behind my mask, because I was like up behind plexiglass or something and trying to enunciate with a mask on. And then we kind of eased up, but at first it was like we all wore these buttons.
Yes, like the doctors in the hospital, y'all are the same, yeah. So
she and her classmates will always have a special place in my heart because they were, the COVID kids, I guess, for me, at a new school. And
I
now,
had not tracked that was your first year too until I was preparing for this interview, and in some ways I'm like, maybe that's a piece of it. You were extra sensitive to that new kid experience because you were the new kid too.
Yeah, we were all so vulnerable, right? We were all like literally, right? The cameras are bringing each other into our homes, which is really, kind of hard to fathom that rather than come together and leave like we do normally, we came together vividly in each other's spaces, and
wild time,
and had to try to do school as like we used to, right? But we couldn't. But now we've kind of reverted back to what we used to, and maybe that's not so great either, as we've realized, right? It's kind of made us, I think in some ways, you obviously learn from the past, you learn from mistakes. Not that we made mistakes necessarily, but just, we had to rely on technology. What do we do with it now? Nobody ever wants to go back to, remote learning.
Yeah.
But we crave connection, right?
Yeah.
That's what we really missed in COVID, is seeing one another. I think the best night was when my boys went back that following, August? We all went home in March, right? When it first hit, nobody went back to school that spring. When they went back to school, Cistercian decided early, we're going to have the boys back in masks. That first night back when we had dinner of, hey, how was school today? Like felt somewhat normal for the first time in what was that, like 5 months?
Yeah.
And it was great. I mean, just the joy they had of seeing their buddies and
feeling like themselves again, and
right.
Like
and
they got their world back.
I think as parents, you could see it, but how can you appreciate it when you're not in their bodies and understanding, like I'm alone. Okay, yeah, it's cool. I get the game all day now that I'm at home, but I don't get to, yuck it up with my pals. I don't get to.
It's pretty unfathomable what they went through.
Gossip with my friends.
Where they were developmentally, for sure.
Yeah. And I still think now the kids that started there are graduating high school. But what about the kids who were so young? trying to do that, right? I mean,
The
I'm glad, thank God I
babies.
wasn't a parent with a kindergartner and a first grader. That I don't know what I would have done.
Well, a lot more wine for
Yeah.
sure.
Right. Definitely.
All right, let me ask you this as we close out. You may have a quick answer because I bet young teachers lean on you, but what is your kind of like number one piece of advice for younger professionals in education?
Just make connections. It's all about connections. It's all about relationships. It really is, both with, first and foremost, with the students, but secondly, find those mentors, find the people you can lean on, because you're going to need them. You know, there are days you just want to cry. There are days, whether that's because something happens to you in your personal life or you feel for a student or
You make fun of a poor young girl wearing capris.
right. Or, you know, or you teach all day and your fly's down and no one says anything.
All those
Right.
moments.
Yes. Just that that if you remember the relationship part, I think that's the why, that the kids need that from you, that the content it's always going to be there. Somebody's always going to want to measure it. But that's not a reflection. The kids remember us for who we are, not what we taught them. And I think that's the most important. I've had 2 new teammates the last couple of years. We've had some change at Parish, and one of them is a newer teacher, and that has been my advice to her, is just, you know, keep building the relationships. You see that as a colleague, right? That the kids flock to certain teachers because of the relationships, not because they're the cool teacher, or you have to relate. I mean,
It's connecting.
yeah, it's connecting, and we all crave it. I mean, I know sometimes the introverts want their solitude, but for the most part, these kids, especially in middle school, need affirmation. They need to be loved. They need to feel like they belong. I gave a homily last year in chapel. It was about really hoping, you know, telling the kids to find your tribe, like whatever that looks like, you know, and that can be in any facet, whether that's in the arts, whether that's in athletics, science, STEM, like here on campus, outside of school, right? They all want to belong, right? We talk about belonging and inclusion at Parish, a lot, but not even a more personal level. Like if they know they've got their crew to vibe with on a daily basis, then they're going to have somebody to support them. And then they've got a few adults they can go to, right? And you see that here too, like at lunchtime or during advisory, or especially when like the 9th graders have a free period. Where do they roam the halls? They come back to middle school and they talk to certain staff members. And that's great because they feel safe and they feel seen and heard and loved. And if we can do that for our kids, then that means we're doing our job. And, you know, the grades will be what they are. But like I said, if they go home and they're smiling and they get in your car and say, Mom, I had a great day, and, you know, word vomit all these stories with their friends and with their teachers, then
Something's going right.
Yeah, then you're going to feel good about it versus, you know, what did you make on that test? And how much studying did you do? And because that doesn't feel good. And so I think that's my advice. Just focus on the relationships and for yourself and with your students.
It's really good advice. And I can attest that Sophia learned a ton in your class. And it was always obvious that you were leading with connection and relationships, and really seeing each of them as individuals. But that opened something up in her as a learner. So, you know, I'll kind of close the way we started. It's not a dichotomy. It's those two things favor each other.
Yeah, they do. And hopefully, you know, not because I have one graduating from college and one going to college, hopefully I'll be doing this for a long time more.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you, Rob. Really enjoyed getting to know you in this way and getting to hear your wisdom, and hope you have a wonderful empty nest
One more
adventure.
year.
No, so you have one more year.
Yeah, so Dylan will be a senior at Cistercian next year.
Your oldest is the same age as my oldest.
He's 22. He's graduating this weekend.
Okay, so that's the same spread, and y'all are 1 year behind us. Okay, I knew that we had something.
Yep.
Got it.
They're almost
so
five.
you
They're
have
almost
one
5
more
years
year.
apart. Yep.
All right.
One more year. One more. So he'll be with me at least in the house another year to keep me in tune with what's going on with the younger generation.
Right. And after that, your students are like, what's different?
Exactly.
He's lost all his
Then I'll rely strictly on AI at that point and TikTok.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, Rob. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Chris, we are back to break down the conversation and highlight what stood out to us. What's on your mind?
So the first thing I'd just like to comment on is Rob's direct quote, "I've never woken up and thought this isn't bringing me joy." I just love how common that sentiment is among the people that come on this podcast, that they take so much joy out of their work. And I'm currently reading The Seed of the Soul. Have you read that?
I love that book.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So I'm reading that, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about, the concept is there are multisensory people and five sensory people. And multisensory is when you expand and make choices, including your intuition. And the fact that he knew in high school, when he went to Petty High School, that he was meant to be an educator, just brought to light. I think educators have been so in touch with their intuition all along. And so many people who've come on this podcast talk about making that choice when they're in 4th grade or 6th grade or high school, and they just knew and walked into that. And to me, that explains a lot about why they're so joyful in that work.
I love that tie.
It was really meaningful to me. And as you know, we haven't even gotten a chance to catch up really, but I just returned from taking my daughter to orientation for her freshman year of college. And it was interesting to me how the advisors spent so much time really helping her plug into what it is that drives her and excites her, and like intuitively what brings her joy, and then built a schedule around that. She hasn't declared a major, and so she's in exploratory studies. And so this particular advisor just really guided her through that thinking. And it also brought up for me, like, what an amazing position educators are in to help kids do that at all ages. And that's never happened to my daughter until, the collegiate experience. But what an opportunity to bring that thinking to the table earlier.
It makes me think of our conversation with Alex Vesely.
I thought it might.
Yeah. Did it do the same to you? Yeah.
Yes. But just different words and a different way to say it.
Yeah. But like from the jump, helping even very young children to be thinking about who they are in the world, but also like under what conditions they thrive. And it's very interesting.
What came up for you?
So one of the things I loved that Rob said was that he tries to interact with the students in a way they want to come back tomorrow. And I thought that had so many implications, like no matter your job, no matter what you're doing, just like how different would we all show up in every interaction if our lens was, I want to create an interpersonal exchange that makes you want to come back for more. It's just such a cool guiding light.
I made a note of that because also tying back to the seed of the soul and, staying connected to your intention of what you're showing up to do. And I wrote next to that comment that there's his intention. That's what he's waking up to do every day. And no wonder he's creating that type of space because it's so intentional.
Yeah. And I definitely experienced that with the way that he lit something up in Sophia. It was so respectful. It was so like, I see you as his interchanges with the students we could overhear because it was COVID. And it was so, I see you all as humans and I'm interacting with you all, like not as equals, but as fellow travelers, kind of like we're all learning, we're all figuring things out. One of the things I noted about him is just he seems infinitely curious to me. And somehow he lit that up also in his students, or lights that up in his students. And I went and grabbed just a few things about curiosity. Can I share them with you?
Please.
So Cashton, who's a researcher, describes curiosity as a hunger for knowledge and experience, and says that it helps us embrace uncertainty, which is key to resilience and adaptability, which I think is such a helpful frame for today's reality, because almost anyone I talk to anywhere feels the burden of the level of uncertainty in the air. And this notion that curiosity puts us in a different relationship with uncertainty that isn't so fear-based, which then helps us feel more resilient and more adaptable, I thought was so cool. And I have more. Can I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. I found that Ian Leslie calls curiosity a tool for moral humility, which I thought was so cool. Just this notion of like being able to like sit back in an exchange where your humility allows you to actually experience the other person, because you have an open question in your mind about them and their thinking and their way of seeing things. I thought that was very applicable for today's world. And Harvard Business School, Francesca Gino, says that curiosity leads to higher performance, more innovation, and that curiosity-driven leadership is where leaders model and reward open-ended exploration and questioning, which that's what I saw in him with the students. He made it safe to go into that exploratory questioning mode. And I have one more thing, which I really thought was interesting. This comes from Susan Engel. She wrote The Hungry Mind, and she argues that curiosity should be the central goal of education rather than a byproduct. And they did some research, and they found that kids asked fewer and fewer questions as they moved through school. And it wasn't that they would lose curiosity, it was that the system didn't reward it. In one study, they found that kids asked 26 questions per hour in preschool. And by middle school, it dropped to below 2.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that fascinating? And she says, this is my last one. She says that emotionally and neurologically, curiosity calms the amygdala and activates the prefrontal cortex. So it supports this notion of co-regulation, and it also protects the bandwidth of the teachers and the students. The quote is, in a dysregulated classroom, curiosity is a nervous system tool, not just a mindset. Anyway, I'm like just
wait, say more about
you.
that. Say more about that.
So curiosity calms down that fight or flight survival state, and it activates the CEO of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, and that allows us to be in relationship, to see each other, all of those things in that ventral vagal, safe and connected nervous system state, which then creates that capacity for co-regulation, where a regulated teacher nervous system is regulated, then I can interact with students in a way they feel seen and soothed and safe, so that they're willing to also step into curiosity and learn in deeper ways. So just this notion that it's not just it would be nice if you were curious. It's like curiosity ends up creating a collective regulated nervous system in the classroom, and it feeds off itself. Curiosity regulates the nervous system. A regulated nervous system has more capacity for curiosity, and on and on and on it goes.
So that all makes perfect sense to me. And he intentionally said in your question about recommended shifts to education, he said, get kids reconnected to their curiosity. So clearly he's intentionally doing that. Do you have any insight, just as a parent who was listening, how he creates that sense of curiosity? Because that was something that stood out to me this weekend, watching Emma go to selecting her classes, and that curiosity was back again. And by the end of her senior year, it was gone. You're making me think about that brain, the Center for Brain Health, when they talked about the adult brain. Like, you stop asking questions as an adult because you think you already know the answer. And I wonder, do kids stop asking questions in the classroom because that's not the environment? It's not been encouraged, so that it's become a pattern. So to our listeners who get this and feel inspired by it, like, how do they do that? How do they create that space to bring curiosity into the room when it maybe doesn't exist in the kids today? Like, that's a feat.
Yeah. It's such a feat. And I think part of it goes back to his intentionality. And then the other part that I think it plays a role here is what he talked about when he talked about really understanding the experience of the middle schooler and knowing how much is at stake for them to speak up, and also how much other stuff they have on their mind that could be all consuming. And he just talked about that and held that with such compassion that I think the students feel that. So it's like pacing, even like space for a kid to kind of ramp up into that decision to be vulnerable and put a question out into the room, interest in them. I can't put a very precise finger on it, but it was just such easy exchange. And it's like Sophia knew he cared about her and cared about her thinking. And Sophia could be prone to only wanting to speak if she had totally figured something out, because she's got kind of a tinge of that perfectionist thing. But he made it so that it was rewarded to grapple. And so then she was like, oh, so excellence in this classroom looks like grappling. Then
That's
I'm
really
willing
good
to step into that. Yeah. And I think so many other classrooms, what's rewarded is certainty. And so then you don't speak unless you're certain. And that's not the best way to learn. We know
I
that.
love that. That's so helpful. Thank you.
Well,
That's really
it's
helpful.
Rob. Yeah.
Did you not, when he described the kid in middle school seeing their crush and feeling like gut punched and then having to go take a science test, like, I could feel it. I felt like I was in the scene feeling it myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, how empathetic to just come to the classroom thinking about it that way.
Yes. His capacity for being empathetic about the middle school experience felt so alive and so off the charts.
And it made me happy that he's putting a stake in the ground that he wants to stay in middle school, because he's clearly like perfectly designed to do that particular job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
And there he is, honoring his intuition again, right?
Full circle.
Yeah. Yeah. I did like his comment that kids need to learn to extend grace to themselves. And that was in relationship or in reference to the school crush and getting sucker punched. And it brought me back to that self-reflection without self-compassion leads to self-criticism, giving yourself grace.
So good. Another thing he said that it was such an offhanded comment for me, but for him, but it like landed in me because he used the word cherish. He said, we have to cherish their childhood because they do have time and there is space for wonder and joy. And I was like, I mean, it like made me feel emotional because of how much we have at play in our culture that pulls us in the opposite direction. The overscheduling, the rushing, the expectations, just and his clarity of like, I'm just going to say it again because the words are so powerful. We have to cherish their childhood. They do have time, and we have to make space for wonder and joy. So powerful.
And he suggested specifically taking things off of their plates so that they can do that, like as an active. That was one of his recommended shifts, taking things off their plate so they can do that.
Yeah.
And I'm clearly emotional post college orientation because I just want to tell Emma stories. But that was also, every essay that she wrote for college or anything was all about not wanting to be an adult and wanting to stay a kid and stay in that place of wonder and joy. So I love that he honored that.
Well, she has the perfect mom as a model for staying in wonder and joy lifelong, because you definitely do that. So that's the good news. It's never over for her.
Well, thank you. And I guess where I learned it, my mom, who's 75 and still doing it.
I love that. I put this in my notes and I can't remember if he said it or he made me think of it, but he talked a lot about belonging and connections. And I don't know if he said, but I wrote it, find your people, find yourself, find yourself, find your people. Did he say that?
I know he said, find your tribe.
So maybe, yes. So he inspired that, but that loop jumped out to me, this notion of like, when we find our people, it helps us find ourselves. And when we find ourselves, it helps us find our people. So like, just like understanding that it is always a self-awareness game and it's always a community connection game. Like those two things, you can't separate them out all the way ever. And they can amplify each other.
And he said it takes time, but it's so worth it because we need affirmation, love, and belonging. And I liked the it takes time piece. And I thought in the absence of that, a teacher can really play that role to get it started, right? Like fill in, be that person for a child who maybe hasn't found their tribe yet. And allowing it to take the time that it needs rather than try to force it with the wrong people.
And like you said, the clarity of the time, the container, the patience, the gentleness. And at the same time, it was days in his classroom before I saw that light go off in Sophia. So it's almost like intuitively she knew who she was dealing with was a safe person, someone who was really interested and curious about her, about the world. Like there's something in the way kids can read adults very quickly that can be quickly opening something in them or quickly shutting something down in them.
My kids always would say, Mom, we know whether someone wants to be there or doesn't want to be there in speaking about their teachers.
Wow.
And I dare to say that educators listening to this and, looking for support and just new ideas, want to be there.
Yeah.
So thank you to our listeners for showing up for kids.
Yes. We see you.
We do.
This whole conversation with Rob made me think of a quote that I read a million years ago. It's from Jen Hatmaker. She wrote it in 2014. Do you want me to read it to you, or
Please
do you
do.
want to close with it?
However you want to go.
Okay, I'll share it with you. She said, hey, middle school teachers, you deserve $40 million a year. Bless it all. These children are all possessed. Reader, tell me there is no worse 3-year period in the human experience than 6th through 8th grade. It was unquestionably my worst stretch, and now I have 1 survivor, 2 soldiers in its trenches, and 2 more in the innocent, precious world of elementary school still. I told Sydney, who has struggled and fumbled and tripped all the way through middle school, quote, baby, these are your worst days. You are horrible. Your friends are awful. Your body is a nightmare. Your brain is impaired. Your peers are lunatics and sociopaths. Your emotions are a train wreck, and you are convinced that your parents are hopeless morons. You could be a prisoner of war and have a better experience than these 3 years of middle school. Just put your head down and get through it. High school is better, college is the best, and then you grow up and pay bills, and then you die. I love you. Good talk. So thank God for the Robs of the world who mitigate that truly challenging time, objectively challenging time.
Love that. Thanks for sharing that. I had not read that.
It makes me laugh every time I read it, and I've probably shared it 100 times in the last 10 years. Anything else on your list? I think I'm good.
No, I think that's a great place to close. That's a great place to close because it was a gift to talk to someone who's so clear about the mission being 8th grade. I'm gonna teach 8th grade. I love it. I love these kids. Like, it was really, that was special. So thanks for bringing him on.
It is wonderful to see extraordinary humans anywhere in the education system. It's especially wonderful to see extraordinary humans working with any group that's particularly vulnerable. And Rob Kowalski is that person, and we thank him. Thank you. Thank Katie Warden, our amazing producer, and we will see everybody next time.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.